guys, and welcome to another video. This is a video I haven't done or updated in a while, so I wanted to get to it. I actually filmed the entirety of this video once, watched it back, and was like, I don't like how I filmed that, so I'm going to completely do it again. So this is the Undecember mana tutorial on ways you can not run out of mana, things you can do to help your mana, and mistakes to avoid. Okay, let's get into this thing. Okay, I'm not sure what order I'm doing some of this in, so some of this might be out of place, but let's talk about your skills, your link runes, your toggles, and all the things that cause your mana to fluctuate when it comes to the rune board. So the first thing is any skill starts out with a base amount, okay? In this case, if you had something like Charge Release, the base amount would be, I believe it is 5 mana per cast. As it levels up, not its rarity, but its actual level, the mana cost will go up on, as far as I know, every active skill. Toggles are different. They have a set amount, but when it comes to an active skill, the cost goes up every time you use it, as far as I know, on every skill. Now, this is important to note because if you are saying early in the game and you're leveling up and you've got your skill at level 23 and then you level it up to 25 and you're starting to have mana trouble, maybe it's time to cool it on leveling it up for a little bit until you get better control of your mana. So that's the first thing, is the level of the skill affects the mana. Next is the amount of link runes you put on it. If we look at the cost of this skill, okay, with nothing connected to it, it costs 11.5 mana. If I put on a trigger, suddenly that costs 13.3. And also important to note that if you're using a spell activation on hit, a spell activation on spell hit, or a spell activation on attack hit, or spell activation while channeling, it will now cast this as well, and it's going to cost this much mana as well. So if you think about adding a skill and you do, and you're suddenly having a ton of mana, that could be an issue because you're casting both skills. Even though you're not actually casting the second one, it's just going off. When this one goes off, it still costs that much mana. And the link, the initial skill itself costs more mana because you put a link on it. Now, if we put another one in here, it goes up to 15.6, it goes up to 17.9, it goes up to 33.4, it goes up to 40.1. So you can see how your mana gets affected directly by the things you put on it. Now, in this case, I put on Mana Storm, which is a link rune that I'm going to talk about more in the link rune section. But that's where the cost went from 21.9 with this on it is 40.1. That is a huge difference, and that's something that you should really be aware of when you put links in. People will just throw stuff in because they saw it in somebody else's build and they don't really read. It happens all the time. Mana Storm is definitely one of the things that causes huge mana problems. And I'll see people use it linked. And if you look now, both are costing significantly more. This one only cost 2.9 previously, and with this, it costs 11.7. So the level of your rune and the number of link runes connected to it, and sometimes those link runes cost extra, and that's something to pay attention to. The next part of the rune board that can directly affect your stuff is toggles. So if we go into the training area here, so I can show you, and we look at my mana. Now, this number here is the multiplier for your mana. So it's going to take the value that we had in your board, okay, so this 40.1 and this 11.7, and it's going to multiply those by 0.92 in my case, okay? This number can get affected by a lot of things, and we are going to talk about that more in other sections. But this one, we're specifically going to talk about toggles. So toggles are skills. You can turn them on, like a light switch, toggle them on and off. In some cases, like the one I've currently got on, you can't actually toggle it on or off. You can just toggle it into version 1 and version 2. There's a couple of those that I'll probably talk about in the runes section a little more. But this number is the base important number when it comes to your thing. People will say, oh, I'm having mana trouble, and I look at this number and they're at like 3.0. That means every cast you do, you're paying 3 times the cost for that spell, and that's why you're running out of mana. So if you look at my 0.92, when I turn on my Seal of Physical Domain, it goes to 0.94, Critical Chance 0.97, Cold Armor 1.0, Illusion Axe 1.08. So the cost has gone up by like nearly 10% or something total. More than 10% total. So that can affect your mana. If you put on a new toggle, really think about what it does. I see people that they just want more stuff on their character, so they're just throwing toggles, every toggle they can get. I see people with non-barrier users using cold armor, which is really only there for barrier users, and they want it on because it does some cold thing or whatever. So really think about the toggles that you have on and what they are doing for you specifically. Don't just throw toggles onto your build because you think, oh, well, that's a toggle, it's going to do something, I want it. Another one I see a lot of people using that isn't serving them well is, where is it? The pink shield. I can never find, there it is, Enduring Pain. Enduring Pain is a decent toggle, okay? It gives you armor and it gives you melee damage. But it's not particularly effective in some builds that try to stay away from enemies. It's not really doing much. Yet people will run it because they just want more stuff on their build. And that can really, really mess with your overall mana cost. So that's the important stuff. That's the 3 big things when it comes to your runes and your rune board setup that you need to think about when it comes to mana. The level of your skills increases the mana cost. The more links you have on, as well as the links themselves, can increase mana. If you trigger another skill, anytime you trigger a skill, in fact, this is something people seem to ignore. So I have buff activation on crowd control for my Shout of Justice. If I have no mana, this can't activate. My Shout of Provocation linked to my move skill. If I don't have enough mana for this when I use the move skill, this won't go off. It's something that people don't think about. So keep in mind that your triggered skills do cost mana, no matter what you're triggering them from. And that's something to pay attention to as you're worrying about your rune board. Okay, so that's the rune board stuff and the basics of how mana works. I think I'm going to put the mana potion section next, even though I filmed it first. So after the potion section, we're going to talk about some of the more important link and skill runes that do things that are mana related. Okay, so let's start with what is mana, and we'll do a quick talk about that. So mana is the cost of doing business. Mana is required for every single action in the game except for moving your character and your standard attack, which literally no one ever uses unless you run out of mana and you hit with your standard weapon. Managing mana is something that you will run into no matter what build you use or how you play. You will run into mana trouble at some point. There are lots and lots of different ways to manage it and to help yourself not run out of it. And we're going to start with the absolute most basic of which is the mana potions. We're going to start there and branch out. So your mana pots, you start with them right from the beginning of the game, and as you progress through the story, you will get larger and larger mana potions. There are 2 different varieties of mana potion. There is the mana potion and the concentration potion. They effectively do the same thing. The biggest difference is that mana potions, in any of their form, have a duration where they tick. I believe it's every half second, and give you mana back for the duration of it. Obviously, the larger recovery, the larger duration, and the lower cooldown is going to be something you want. So the biggest potions you can use, you should always have on your bar, unless you're some insane build that somehow manages to absorb enough mana. Otherwise, you're going to be using mana potions. Mana potions are dirt cheap, so use them a lot. The first thing I can recommend if you're having any kind of mana trouble is to go to your potion settings. Okay, down at the button here, go to your character screen or your inventory, it'll bring this up. Go to your potion, find where your mana potion is set. First, make sure it's on mana. I have run into many a person that is like, my mana's running out, and they don't have their their mana potion on mana, and they don't have it on auto use. When it is on auto use, you can set the amount that it will start using it. Now, I don't care about cost of mana potions. These things drop like unbelievable amounts to the point where I'm selling them. So go ahead and set yours really high. There's a really good reason to set it high, and I always talk about this. If you set your potion, your mana potions to a very high activation, that means it will go off as soon as it hits that threshold. I have mine on this character because he's insanely heavy mana at 99%. Typically, I say about 80% for most people. If you are running a barrier build, it is more important to have it set higher because you want to make sure your mana stays full for barrier reasons. So setting it really high is a good thing. Because they tick over time, it doesn't mean it's going to use that potion and you're going to fill 1%. It means it's going to start filling, and as you spend down, it's going to be filling it back up, keeping your health or your mana potion, your mana orb, I guess, full. And then by the time it's cooled down and you've already started to drop, it can go off again and keep you full. So generally, I always recommend, first thing, if you're ever having any mana trouble, is just try setting your mana potion to go off a little earlier. Now, I do want to talk about the other mana potion, the concentration potions. Typically, you get some of these from rewards as you progress through the story. And later in the game, honestly, these become inconsequential. Unless you're doing things that are insanely mana heavy, like the Void Rift, where your mana consumption is being amped up, and you might need to use these. These don't work the same way as mana potions. Concentration potions give you the entire amount all at once. So they are what I would call emergency heal or emergency mana, the two different versions of them. And I set, when I do use these, I set the mana activation very, very low. That way I don't have to worry about activating it. I set it at like very low, something like 15%, so that if I get to a point where it hits, it'll go off. And because these have such a long cooldown, you want these to go off as early as possible without wasting them and then not having them when you need them. So there's mana pots, and basically everything you need to worry about. Now there's tons of things when it comes to potions that can affect the cooldown, the duration, the total recovery, the efficacy of it, and other things. And we are going to talk about those in other sections. But when it comes right down to it, mana pots are bread and butter when it comes to most builds. There are ways to mitigate the amount of mana you use and stuff, but when it comes to most builds, mana is going to be your mana pots are going to be your biggest thing. So we're going to go through some other stuff as I go through the sections. I'm going to talk about things that are available to get you mana in these sections and things that you shouldn't use even though they are available, that they're not very effective. Obviously, it is going to depend on your build and whatnot, but let's get into this thing. Okay, so let's talk about some runes themselves. Now, when it comes to active runes, one thing that is unavoidable is spells cost more mana than attacks do. There's just no way around it. And this is typically because as an int user, as a spell caster, you're probably going to have a lot more int, which means you're going to have a bigger mana pool, as well as, unknown to most people, in behind the scenes, int gives you mana regen. The more mana you have, or the more intelligence you have, the higher your regen is. It's a passive thing. It's in behind the scenes. Most people don't even pay attention to it. But that's an unavoidable fact of using spells versus using attacks. Now, the important thing really comes with the link runes. Again, some of them have higher costs. Some of them are 15%. Some of them are 20%. Ones like Mana Storm have a much, much higher cost. And we're going to talk about a couple of the big ones when it comes to mitigating that cost. Now, the first one I'm going to talk about is the big daddy. It's the one everybody wants, is dampen resource cost. Now, dampened resource cost is wonderful, but it's also a pain because right now you can only get it from a few sources. One, you can get it from the guild itself, from the guild vendor. You can get it from guild reward boxes from events and stuff. And you can buy it very, very, very unlikely from the general vendor in Saludo. If you go to the lesser mysterious link rune boxes and you go way down here to the bottom, you can see that you can get it. Where did it go? You can get it for a whopping 0.019% chance at $10,000 a box. Give me 1 second. I want to see if I can figure out the math on this. Okay, I don't know why I bothered with this, but I wanted to see. So it would take you, on average, okay, probably about 50 million gold to get one consistently from the dampened resource cost from the less mysterious link rune chest. Now, I'm not saying that it's actually going to take 50 million. It might take 1 million. You might take more than that. But that's some joke math that I did to give you a rough idea. So it is not a great way to get it, but you can get it from there. Now, the thing about dampened resource cost that you want is exactly what it sounds like. It dampens the resource cost. Initially, it starts at a low percent. It decreases the cost of whatever it's linked to by 5%. At rare, it gives you a -1. Now, that's not -1%, that's -1. So if it's a percentage-based thing, it's taking off a whole percent. If it's a flat value, it's taking off a flat number. This is really important to note when you're talking about toggles, because you're typically going to have this thing linked to a toggle, not a spell. So that -1 is going to be very, very strong. At red, it goes -2. And this is where it becomes a little bit interesting. If you are really, really having mana trouble, you can link this to your skills, and it actually does give you a little bit of a damage boost. I don't recommend connecting it to skills. This is really, really meant to be linked to a whole bunch of toggles so that you can lower their overall cost. But you can put this on, say, a triggered skill to reduce the cost and still get some damage out of it if you want to do it that way. Dampened resource cost is an absolute must as far as I'm concerned in almost every build and game. There are obviously builds that don't need this. There are builds that work around it in other ways, but this is almost always going to be very important. And when it comes to managing your mana, this thing is the big daddy, the one you absolutely want. Okay, preserve mana. This is another link rune that I see people using. Typically, what you would do is link this to a linked skill, so not your main skill, because putting this on a linked main skill, you're going to lose a lot of damage, whereas if you put it on a linked spell, you're going to lose much less, but it will help your mana. What it does is every 10 stacks, it gives you some of the mana you spent back. Frankly, I don't think it's a particularly good thing, and there's a lot better ways to deal with mana problems, but especially early game, if you are really, really having trouble, you can buy this from the shop, you can link it, and it will be very effective. Again, I don't know how overall effective it is, because I know it does give you mana regen and stuff, but I don't ever really use this, and I don't think I ever really will, because I know better ways to do it, and they're not generally expensive to do. But this is something that I see a lot of people using, especially early game, or if you're new to the game. So if you see yourself having mana trouble, this can be a quick way out of that. Okay, next we're going to talk about Harmony. Now, Harmony is something I have never made use of in a build, and it's because it's got a lot of text and it's kind of confusing. The reason I am going to bring it up is that people misunderstand how this works. And when I ask them, when I do Dr. Dummy and I help people, and I say, why are you using this? They don't understand what it is doing. They just saw somebody else with a similar build using it, so they use it. So I'm going to make it super clear about this one really quick. When hit point and mana are above 50%, you get 20% resource cost amp, which means all your spells cost that much more, but you get damage amplification. When your hit point and your mana are under 50%, you get resource cost dampening and attack speed. Now, when you awaken it, you get more stuff. From what I've been told, people use this to get hit point or barrier absorb, although I think there's better ways to do that, but this is something that people use. And again, I'm bringing this one up because people get confused. They think it's one or the other has to be above, or if one's above, you're getting one effect, and if one's below, you're getting the other effect. And it's not. It's, as far as I know, it is both. So be careful if you are using this, because generally you're going to have your hit points and your mana above 50%, which means it's going to cost you that much more mana to get some damage in. Again, I don't know what the overall purpose of this is, and if somebody uses this in their build to good effect, please let me know in the comments. I would love to know more about it. Okay, moving on to, we're going to talk quick about Mana Storm again. Okay, Mana Storm. Mana Storm is a very strong link rune. It gives a lot of damage amplification, but it has a massive resource cost. When it's legendary, is a +8 resource cost, which can be incredibly detrimental to some builds. With the awakening, you can get the resource cost down a bit, but keep in mind this is still a very costly one to use. Along the same line, I am going to talk about Mana Outburst. I've never had cause to use this, but it's going to be used typically on things that have cooldowns, so that you can bring the cooldown down to a point where you can use it very frequently. It does, however, consume 20% of your current mana. So I'm not sure how best you would use this, but this is something I want to talk about. It can burn through your mana very quickly, but it is very strong. I'm not sure, again, what skills would make best use of this, because it has to be linked to something with a cooldown for it to, or I'm pretty sure you have to have it. No, you don't have to have it on, but okay, there you go. Again, it's a link that I've never had reason to use, so I don't know it very well. If somebody uses this in a build to what they feel is a very good effect, let me know. I'd love to learn more. But that's pretty much it for link runes that really affect mana in any way. Again, every link rune that you connect to something increases the cost, but in most cases, they just increase the cost, and that's it. I don't think there's any other ones in here, and there's not really any skill runes that affect mana, other than using toggles, obviously. Okay, so we're going to talk next about the Zodiac. Okay, the Zodiac. Now, this thing is absolutely a minefield of things that I don't feel like are good choices, especially specifically in regards to mana. Now, obviously, if we do a search quick, you will see that there is a ton of points that have things to do with mana. Now, in most cases, they are just going to be straight added mana. Most of them are incidental. They're mana that you're going to pick up while getting other things. Almost none of these are going to be specifically mana that you're trying to get. See, another mana. And in most cases, you can pretty much ignore them. Now, the one pitfall I do want to talk about that I see a lot of people do that I feel like is not a good choice, and this is, again, specifically in regards to mana consumption. I see a lot of people taking stuff in here for these mana potion cooldown things, mana potion recovery, mana potion effect, getting 50 mana instantly upon using mana, and overall potion effect stuff in the Zodiac. Now, again, if you're using the enhanced potion setup where everything's potion, that's different, and obviously that's not what we're talking about here. These points, I feel like, are incredibly wasted because you can get so many other better things with these points. I know some people feel like, oh, if my potions were just a little better, I would be able to not have to worry about mana, but there's so many better ways to do it. And this is pitfall number one, in my opinion, is taking anything that is going to change the cooldown of your mana potions or increase your mana potions, and specifically this one, the 50 recover instantly upon using a mana potion. when you get to the end of the game, especially if you're a spellcaster, like I'm at 3,000 mana, gaining 50 instantly is basically nothing. It's not even worth your time. I definitely see a lot of people going into that. And again, as a major stopgap, I get it, but it's not effective. It's not a good way. You only get, what is it, 117 or something total, 107 total Zodiac points, and wasting 5 of them to make your mana potions a little bit better is not a particularly great way to go about it. Now, there's other things in here that I see people go with. Let's see if I can find the other one. Hold on. Come on. I thought it was in here. Where is it? Nope. 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 Of course, I'm not going to be able to find it now. Is it here? No, it's not. What I'm looking for, because I can't find it, is gaining like 1 mana on hit. People will, because of other games having a lot of mana absorb on hit, other games, you know, Diablo, Path of Exile, and that, generally you can get to a point where you're gaining enough mana that you don't need to use potions, and those games are set up around that. This game is not. And trying to get mana absorb from the very few sources you can get it is absolutely not worth your time. It is a waste of points. There it is. Okay, so it's buried. There it is. My mana on every attack. And specifically, it says attack hit, not spell hit. It is not an effective way to gain mana. Again, if you're casting 5 times a second, and those are costing you 60 mana per, taking 1 mana off of each of those when you're talking about 300 mana a second is nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. It is definitely not worth your time to go for, in my opinion. Obviously, you can do whatever you want. These mana that are percent-based are also really not worth your time. It's not your mana pool that is the issue, it's how you're spending it and how inefficiently you're spending it, or other sources. So yeah, getting the mana on hit here and from other sources, including the gear and whatnot, not effective. Don't do it. Mana regen is something else you will see in here. And it's going to affect your mana regen in general. I think there's a lot more health regen and barrier regen, but I know some spots in here do mana regen, and mana regen percent is not a particularly effective thing. It does work in conjunction with your potions and stuff and help a little bit, but in the long run, it is not an effective thing, and it's not a good way to spend your points. Now, the one thing in here that I absolutely do recommend for certain builds, especially barrier builds, is convert mana. Now, convert mana is big, long, complicated thing. Boils down to you use some of your mana or some of your health as your mana. Okay, it can solve pretty much any mana issue as long as you can assume that you're going to lose health. Again, works great with barrier builds because you don't care about your health. The one point I do want to bring up about this is that your health pool, the larger your health pool, the better convert mana works. So if you've got like super small health pool, even though you've got a ton of barrier, this can be ineffective because I know it does something. It stops at a certain percent or something. Again, I've never really read the whole thing because it doesn't matter. It converts health to mana. That's all you really need to know for this video anyway. I think that's it in terms of the Zodiac. So the stuff that you want to avoid is potion stuff, regen stuff, or mana on hit. They are not effective. As far as I can tell anyway, I've never seen them put to good use. The convert mana node is available in a few spots in the Zodiac, depending on your build. And if you're a spellcaster and you're having mana trouble because you have crazy mana costs, that's definitely a good way to do it. I most recently on this character switched to it. I know it's not shown here because I was doing some testing, but I've switched into Convert Mana. It's really, really good. I don't think there's anything else really mana related in here that you need to worry about. No, wait, there is. Never mind. I take it back. There are multiple other things, and the two of them are the polar opposites of each other. So you have resource cost dampening and resource cost amplification. Typically, resource cost amplification you will get with a big upside. So in this case, you're going to get 15% element damage amplification, but it's going to cost you 8% more mana. In this case, the opposite of it, I'm going to gain cast speed amplification, but it's going to cost me less mana. These are very, very common throughout the specialty trees, and I'm pretty sure they're somewhere in the non-specialty trees as well. Oh yes, never mind. There was the example of Distorted Senses that has amplification of resource cost. Those are good things. If you're having trouble with your mana, finding points in your build like this that maybe you should switch away from, put it onto something else, come back to it when you have your mana better under control. So these can definitely work. The last one I do want to talk about is one that I ran into an issue with recently. In some of these specialization stones, you can get a thing that is something to the effect of like 6% of your mana is taken instead of health when you take damage. If you have a really small health pool or mana pool like I do, 6% of your mana is a lot of your mana. Like, it was making me run out of mana consistently, and I'm glad it's something I caught before I did this video, so that I can point it out. Unless you have a massive mana pool, do not take these. There's a couple of them here. There's some in the special gear and stuff as well. But don't take the stuff that takes mana instead of health unless you have a huge mana pool, because it'll absolutely bork your mana. Okay, now I think I've actually got everything I wanted to talk about in here. So again, important stuff. Watch for mana, things that cost you more mana, and if you are very well barriered up, don't use Convert Mana unless you're a barrier build or have some other crazy regeneration for your health. And yeah, and that's it for the Zodiac. Let's move on to gear. This one's going to be the most complicated one. Okay, gear. Now, gear is a minefield of mana effects. Some of them are really good, some of them are worthless. The biggest one is mana regen. You can see it on quite a few of the pieces of jewelry, on the gear. And if you're in a situation where you really, really need mana, it can help, but it is not something you should typically aim for. One of the things you should aim for is mana cost dampening, or I'm not sure what the actual name of it is because I don't have any pieces on with it, but typically shoulders and gloves come with it at the lower item levels, so like 34 and below. I think they all have a reduced mana cost one. Those can be very, very helpful. You can get a authority implicit on boots that is resource cost reduction, which can be very nice. What are the other ones? I think there's a few others that you can see around, but the big ones are on your chest and your belt. With your belt, you can get a base resource cost reduction, okay, from the Vesper Authority. Now, I think it is monster level or item level 121 and up will get you -4 resource cost, and lower than that will get you -2 or 3. At least I think that's the number. I can't remember. It's been a long time since I did it. But this is a really, really good way to reduce your overall mana cost. You'll see most people have a belt with resource cost reduction on it. You can make it a -7 cost by doing a dual authority with the Aquila implicit prefix that has, it's something like movement speed cooldown or movement skill cooldown cost or something like that will roll into -3 resource cost. So you can get -7 on here. Alternatively, there is a belt called the Peddler's Potion Belt that is a unique belt. That is generally, you'll see a lot of people using it. It is very good because it comes with the belt built-in -7 mana cost, or up to -7 mana cost, which is really, really good. Another belt that I do want to bring up is the Gainada's belt. It is one of the 2 pieces of gear that has the convert mana node on it, so you don't have to get it from the Zodiac. It has the exact same effect, but you get it from a piece of gear instead of from your Zodiac, freeing up your Zodiac for other important things. The second one of those is a necklace, the Medal of Penance, which also has the convert mana node. So those are 2 pieces of gear that have the convert mana and the minus mana cost on the belt. There is a few others that also have just flat mana cost reduction. I know one of them is the Unos Gator's Boots, has -2 mana cost. There's a ton of others scattered about that have mana cost reduction or or flat mana cost. They're all good. Now, there is one that I have never used, but I've seen other people use, and it's on chest. I don't know the authority off the top of my head, but it's an authority modifier. You'd have to look for it. I don't even know if it's a prefix or a suffix. I think it's a prefix that you can get trap skill rune level and then craft it into -4 mana cost. So that's something you should really, really think about. If you have a free spot in your chest piece, a lot of people use chest pieces to get resistances and stuff, so that's a great place to get minus mana cost if you can't get it from other sources. I think that's a lot of the thing, I think. The other one I do want to talk about with belt is there is a lot of mana cost reduction, or mana potion cooldown time, mana pot effect, and the implicit can be mana pot effect. Again, those aren't bad, because these are places where you can't get anything super duper amazing. Well, you can get some really good stuff, but those are not bad stopgaps if you run into them. Again, there are tons and tons and tons and stuff in your gear that you can get, but the only really good ones are the reduced mana cost, so they just straight resource cost, and then the implicits on resource cost dampening on shoulders, even on some of the uniques it's available, as well as the gloves, and then the resource cost dampening on boots. There's some of those. I mean, pretty much every unique has one of them that's going to be a resource cost dampening. These are nice to get, and again, on a crafted pair you can get an implicit from quite a few of the different boots that is resource cost dampening. You'll notice if you go through them, one of them is different. I'm pretty sure it's Spica. Instead of resource cost dampening, it says dampens resource cost. It's just a typo. It's exactly the same thing. Pretty sure that's it for gear. If I missed anything super awesome in regards to mana conservation or mana help in the gear, please let me know. Next, we're going to go into Mastery. Okay, your Enchant Mastery, really when it comes down to it, only has a few things that can affect your mana in any way. One of them is taking the stats points in Accessory, and the other one is taking Potion Effect in Mastery. Now, Potion Effect is not something I would say to typically take, even though it does affect your hit point, your mana, and your enhanced potions. So unless you're going with the super duper enhanced potion setup, I wouldn't recommend taking these, because Seal Aura and Seal Effect is just going to give you more, again, unless you're really, really going with the mana thing. With the Alchemy Mastery, there's a lot here. This whole row, this third row in, is all mana pot stuff. Mana pot cooldown speed, mana pot effect, mana pot cooldown speed, and then the big important one, Spring of Inspiration. It will give you resource cost dampening for 5 seconds upon using a mana potion. Now, if you have your mana potion cooldown low, okay, to like, mine's not particularly low, but if you can get it at like 5.5 or 6 seconds, and set your potion activation really high, this will constantly be up. So you'll get a 15% resource cost dampen pretty much permanently, which is really, really good. And I really, really recommend it. I mean, the other stuff in here obviously doesn't have anything to do with mana. The one thing I do want to talk about, in a completely unrelated thing, is don't take the hit point potion stuff. Hit point potions are effectively useless in the end game, with the exception of Absolute Perfection, that when you use a hit point potion, it will remove Bird Bleeded Venom. If you are someone who has a really high health pool, set your mana potion or your health potion activation really low and force activate this, so that you can break these if you need to. And if you're a barrier user, your health potion's never going to go off automatically unless you're in dire straits. So again, if you get a whole bunch of stacks of Bird Bleed or Venom, use a hit point potion to get rid of it. That's it for Mastery. Again, very, very straightforward. Just get the mana potion stuff through here and avoid personally taking this potion. We're going to talk jewels next, and then I'm going to see if I have anything else to talk about. Okay, jewels. Quick point of note, I was looking through these. In the star jewels, you can get potion manufacturing technique, which will give you mana potion cooldown recovery speed and mana potion effect. And if I see someone with this star jewel on their gear, I will come to your house and smack you. You can only get 4 star jewels, and if you decide that mana potion cooldown and recovery speed is something you desperately need, no, don't, no, please. Oh my god, why is that even an option? Okay, anyways, as for most of the jewels, there is almost nothing to do with anything mana related. I'm sure some of these have some like secondary effects of having increased like extra mana percent or something. Maybe. So there's, again, purifying ability, mana potion effect, and instantly recover mana potion. Don't waste your time with this. The only one you should worry about if you are having mana trouble is the blue. Now, the only thing in here worth looking at when it comes to mana is dampen resource cost. If you get a dampen resource cost jewel at tier 3, you can get up to like almost 12% resource cost reduction, and this is a very huge amount. I know jewels are a little harder to get right now than they used to be, but blue jewels are so common, you should definitely use these. I have used these as a stopgap. Do not go with mana. Do not go with mana percent. The only thing you should be going with if you're having mana trouble at all is this resource cost dampen. The other thing I did want to talk about quick is another thing that I definitely don't recommend, but I do want to point it out, which is in your Rune Hunter registry. In the first page, you have Seftar's Blessing of 7% resource cost dampening. Even if you're having severely bad mana trouble, I would not recommend this as opposed to the 60% or plus 60 movement speed. It is a flat movement speed boost. It gets affected by all your other move speed. This is so much better. I get the instinct to take this if you're having mana trouble, but there's better ways to fix it. And keep in mind that switching these costs 1 million gold, so it's not worth doing. I'm just going to do a quick double check to make sure I have talked about everything, and then we're going to finish this video up. Okay, one last thing before we finish up is Lacrima. This is something that happened to someone who I was working with that they didn't realize. Jewels do not count in your Lacrima. They put on some, they wasted some resources to put some resource cost reduction on a thing they were putting in their Lacrima. Jewels do not go into, like, you do not get the score, you do not get the effect. So don't do that. Outside of that, that is everything I know about mana conservation. I might have missed something. It is a very deep topic. I might have missed something in terms of a unique that is really important to certain builds. And when it comes to fringe builds, I'm going to call them, so things like Sentry or Minion or Screwball builds that I don't know about, some of these tricks might not work, so they might not help. If you are someone playing a really weird build and you've got something that like, oh, I did this and I had this trouble with mana, please let me know in the comments. The more I know, the more I can help other people, and that's why I make these videos. For now, guys, thanks for watching. Get out there and grind, and try not to run out of mana.